In December of this past year, survivors, journalists, and activists all gathered together in Buenos Aires, Argentina, to blow the whistle and raise awareness for ending clerical abuse. There were survivors of Opus Dei at this event, some journalists and authors that I think you'll probably recognize as well. And considering how major of a gathering that this was and what they were discussing, we are going to talk about it today. So hit the like button, please, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's go ahead and get into it. So I have pulled up a series of articles for us to go over, some of which were published in the days leading up to the ECA summit, and some that were published towards the end. Everything that we're going to go over in this video is linked down in a source document in the description of this episode. Feel free to access that and look at these articles at your leisure. Because of what we are going to be discussing today, not everything that we are going to be going over is going to be appropriate for all audiences, so viewer discretion is advised. The first article that I have pulled up here is from El Diario. The headline is a zinger. I was deceived and ended up as a slave for 30 years. Opus Dei victims gather awaiting Leo XVI. Subheading says Buenos Aires will host a global summit on allegations of abuse and trafficking against the Catholic organization while victims await a decision from Leo on the organization's new statutes. That's right. If you have been following the situation with this Catholic organization, Opus Dei, then you may know that they were ordered to create new statutes quite some time ago and have been taking their sweet time getting there. And as of yet, as a matter of fact, we don't have new statutes yet. People are still waiting on those, waiting on the new Pope, Pope Leo, to do something to kick the can a little bit further down the road. So let's go ahead and get into this article. This photo here at the top, it says one of the dozens of women who have accused Opus Dei of exploitation and trafficking. I have no reason not to believe that this isn't a picture of assistant numeraries inside Opus Dei and inside an Opus Dei center doing what they do best, which is literally everything. So this article was published on December 3rd by Paula Bistagnino, friend of the channel. And it starts, I was deceived because they promised me I would go to a girls' school to study hospitality, and I ended up as a slave for almost 30 years, serving and cleaning without rest. I managed to escape after 16 years, but they found me, and I returned for another 9 years until I was able to leave again. I was a minor when they gave me the Silas and the scourge and told me that I had to flagellate myself every day to emulate the suffering of Jesus. For decades, they have recruited teenagers from all over the world, from both upper and lower classes, using deceptive methods behind their parents' backs and behind the Vatican's back. These are some of the excerpts from the testimonies that will be heard at the first global summit on allegations of spiritual abuse, servitude, and psychological manipulation faced by the Catholic institution Opus Dei, which will take place on December 16th in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Specialists and whistleblowers from Latin America and Europe will gather there. The initiative arose from the global organization Ending Clergy Abuse, ECA, following a historic private audience with Pope Leo at the Vatican on October 20th. It was the first time a sitting head of the Catholic Church has received an NGO fighting clerical abuse. And that is a pretty big deal, considering the fact that the Catholic Church has a 2,000-year paper trail of abuse. For the first time in 2,000 years, a pontiff decided to hear what these people have to say. Wow. Quote, the church has a moral responsibility to support survivors and prevent future harm, said Tim Law, co-founder and board member of ECA in the United States. That same day, Robert Prevost also granted a private audience to the Peruvian journalist and former ECA member Sergio Salinas, who investigated the abuses of the Sodalitium of Christian life that led to the order's dissolution by Pope Francis. Prevost knew him well from his years as a missionary. And I have an entire standalone deep dive going into the downfall of the SCV and the people connected to it if you are interested in learning more about that. It is just the part 1 right now. I'm working on part 2, so it's the perfect time to jump in and get caught up before I release the second part. Since 2018, when he was Bishop of Chiclayo and second vice president of the Episcopal Conference, his active commitment to the search for truth in the Sodalitium case was evident, as was his discreet yet effective support for the victims of institutional abuse and his determination to combat the then Catholic sect. This commitment continued even after his appointment as Cardinal Prefect of the Dicastery for Bishops, Salinas told El Diario. The investigative journalist and former member of the Sodalitium, author of Half Monks, Half Soldiers and The Truth Will Set Us Free, will be one of the hosts of the conference on Opus Dei in Buenos Aires. Unlike other cowardly, timid, and indolent prelates, Prevost was one of the steadfastest allies we had in this story in Peru and later with his election as Pope, where he continued to receive defamatory attacks from the remnants of the sodality of Christian life, remarked Salinas, who, because of his denunciations, suffered media and judicial persecution that could land him in jail. In 2021, 43 women reported to the media and to the Vatican's Tribunal for the Doctrine of the Faith that they had been deceived and subjected to exploitation by Opus Dei as unpaid servants in conditions of semi-confinement for decades since they were teenagers in Argentina. The complaint, although not formally answered by the Holy See, prompted Pope Francis' decision to modify the hierarchy and remove privileges from Opus Dei, the organization founded by Jose Maria Escrivá de Balaguer in 1928 and present in 68 countries across 5 continents. Furthermore, the head of the Catholic Church demanded a change to the institution's statutes, which, after his death in 2025, were handed over to his successor, Pope Leo. Amidst anticipation surrounding Pope Leo's plans for Opus Dei, the summit will be held in Buenos Aires. The Argentine capital was chosen because it is there that a formal accusation has been filed against the highest authorities of Opus Dei in that country for the past 40 years. The accusation was filed in October 2024 after a 2-year secret investigation by the Office of the Prosecutor against Trafficking and Exploitation, Protex, and Federal Prosecutor's Office Number 3, headed by Eduardo Tayano, who concluded that, quote, there was a system of recruitment and exploitation of poor women, servitude for elite members, and priests, end quote. Among those accused is Father Mariano Fazio, currently the second most important figure in Opus Dei worldwide. Among the speakers at the summit will be the British journalist Gareth Gore, author of Opus, producer Monica Toribas, director of the Max series The Heroic Minute, and Argentine journalist Paula Bistagnino, who broke the story of the Opus Dei maids. Also participating will be the ECA lawyers Pedro Salinas and Lucas Licor, and Sebastian Sal, the lawyer representing the 43 Argentine women who filed complaints. The final session will feature testimonies from former members of the controversial organization from Spain, Mexico, Peru, Ireland, and Argentina, who are urging the Holy See to hear their accounts before deciding the organization's future. Susana Lencina was a teenage maid for a family in Rosario when her employer put her in a car to take her to the Opus Dei maid school in Buenos Aires. Tita Villamayor and her cousin were brought to a rural town in Paraguay at the age of 15 with the promise of a school in the capital, Asunción, and were soon taken to Argentina and put to work. Beatriz Delgado managed to escape after serving 16 years without pay and in conditions of confinement, but she was found and forced to return against her will for another 9 years. Alicia Tarancio was over-medicated with psychiatric pills and left in a room so that none of her companions could see her. When her father died, Norma Martinez had no money for the funeral and received no help. She was told the same thing as when she asked to see her family, that she should practice detachment and that her family was Opus Dei. The stories of Susana, Tita, Beatriz, Alicia, and Norma are just 5 of the 44 stories that the Argentine justice system heard in the last 2 years before filing a historic accusation for human trafficking and labor exploitation against the regional authorities of the Prelature of the Holy Cross and Opus Dei, which puts the highest authorities of the organization in the Rio de la Plata region in the dock. So, there's that article there. I wanted to start with it, one, because it was written by Paula, and I'm a big fan of all of her hard work and all of her incredible boots-on-the-ground journalism that she has been doing in Latin America about Opus Dei and about this entire labor trafficking situation. So I wanted to give her flowers, put her front and foremost here, and I figured, considering the source, that this would just be a great article to read first to kind of orient everyone in case you're coming into this thing and you weren't 100% sure what the ECA summit was. So I have a couple of other articles here that were published in the days leading up to the summit. You can see this one here was published on December 6th. I wanted to gather a couple of more just to see if there were any other details in any of these other articles that maybe wasn't in the one El Diario article that I just read. So this has been translated from Spanish to English by my browser extension, so apologies if the grammar is not perfect. But the headline reads, Buenos Aires will host the first World Summit on Abuses linked to Opus Dei. Specialist lawyers, journalists, and victims from various countries will participate on December 16th in a global summit organized by ECA to expose abuses, servitude, and trafficking allegations linked to Opus Dei. This photo here at the very front is very, very well known. At this point, it's very well recognized. It's been used in a lot of the media and reporting about the whole case in Argentina concerning the 43, and as far as I know, depicts two assistant numeraries or future assistant numeraries of Opus Dei being taught how to properly serve and set a table, which is why they were there. So let's scan through here and see what this article has to say. So the day on December 16th will be organized into 3 thematic blocks. The first, what is Opus Dei and how does it work, will bring together journalists, investigative writers, and former members from various countries who will analyze the institution's internal mechanisms and its modus operandi. Participants will include, among others, the Argentine journalist and author of the book Te Severe, the British journalist Gareth Gore, the producer Monica Charibas, responsible for the documentary The Heroic Minute, and former members of Opus Dei from various Latin and Spanish countries. The second session will address the law and church abuse, a challenge to justice, featuring presentations by lawyers Lucas Licor, Sergio Salinas, Giordano, and Sebastian Sal, specialists in criminal law, human rights, and human trafficking. They will analyze the legal obstacles and structural shortcomings faced by victims when reporting abuse within religious institutions. Finally, the third block will be dedicated to the direct testimonies of the victims, survivors of sexual abuse in institutions linked to Opus Dei, relatives of victims, including the father of a student abused at the Gatzalueta school in Spain, and former auxiliary numeraries from different countries who will recount experiences of servitude, spiritual coercion, and psychological control. The meeting will be broadcast on ECA Global's YouTube channel. And so I think it's really interesting how they structured the summit. This was not just an opportunity to bring survivors together to air their various grievances. This was a very structured and intentional gathering of people who are professionals in their various fields, or people who have firsthand experience and knowledge of, unfortunately, clerical abuse. So this was not just some sort of fly by the seat of your pants, everybody come out and air your grievances and complain if you have something. This was a very intentional gathering of people who not only understand the situation and the nuances within human rights as a whole, but also people who have lived really, really closely to this experience and can speak to the realities of it better than anyone reporting on it could ever hope to. The summit comes after a milestone for human rights organizations. Remember, we read that Leo met with representatives of the ECA. Salinas was amongst them. And then it says the case of the 43 women, the complaint that changed the history of Opus Dei, and it gives some historical context there. So I'll read this in case you are a little rusty on the details. In 2021, a group of 43 women from Argentina made an unprecedented complaint, but public, before the media and the Vatican's Tribunal for the Doctrine of the Faith. They claim to have been deceived since adolescence with false educational promises and then subjected to unpaid servitude for decades in conditions of semi-confinement. Although the Holy See never formally responded, the testimony of these women triggered key decisions by Pope Francis: the elimination of Opus Dei's historical privileges, the modification of its hierarchy, and the demand for a change in its statutes. The new statutes were finally delivered in 2025 to Leo after Francis' death. Where are they? We don't know. Meanwhile, the Argentine justice system moved forward with the case. Federal prosecutor Eduardo Tayano and Protex, headed by Maria Alejandra Mangiano and Marcelo Colombo, filed charges against Opus Dei authorities in Argentina, dating back to the 1980s. According to the indictment, there was a system of recruitment and exploitation of poor women intended to provide servitude to elite members and priests. So, labor trafficking. For ECA, which has a presence in 30 countries, the meeting is part of a global strategy against clerical abuse and institutional cover-ups. The organization maintains that silence protects the abuser, not the child, and demands profound reforms in structures that they have alleged allowed impunity to prevail for decades. All right, and this next article here comes directly from Argentina. This was published December 15th, so the day before the summit. Headline reads, Women denounce exploitation and forced labor linked to Opus Dei in Argentina. Former members say they were deceived as minors, subjected to unpaid domestic work and extreme control in Opus Dei. So on December 16th, Buenos Aires will host the first international meeting. Former members who claim to have been deceived and trafficked when they were minors, and that includes the 43 women in Argentina. They claim they were lured to Opus Dei schools as children and teenagers under the promise of receiving an education. According to their accounts, upon arrival, they were forced to work up to 12 hours a day cooking and cleaning for members of the male elite without any kind of pay. According to information reported by The Guardian, Pope Leo encouraged the organizers to convene the conference privately. However, the allegations go beyond excessive work. Many women report being subjected to extreme levels of control. And just before we move on really quickly, the rumor carried by The Guardian that Pope Leo had privately encouraged the organizers of this conference generated quite a bit of turmoil among certain Catholic sectors leading up to and following this summit. And in my December newsroom analysis, which is a segment that I do every single month here on the Deep Dive Project, I read one of the articles, which was from the Catholic Herald. And if you want to see my reaction to it, you can go and watch my December newsroom analysis. It was the last article that I read in that analysis, so you can find it pretty easily. But if you would rather not have to do the searching, I will be posting just that segment by itself after I post this video going over and talking about this summit, just because I think it will be a nice second part to this entire thing. And now that I am talking about the ECA summit and reading these articles and everything, going to be releasing this video, I think it will be good to highlight once again some of the response to the people organizing this and to the Pope allegedly supporting it. Very, very interesting, very odd, I think, but I digress. Reading on. According to the testimonies, letters were censored, family visits were discouraged, and reading any material that wasn't for children or religious purposes was forbidden. Furthermore, even after managing to escape, the women claimed they were left without money, clothes, and even professional qualifications. Based on the women's testimonies, Argentina launched an investigation. Although it went slowly, in 2022, they also ordered the review of the statutes of Opus Dei. The Vatican did. So we've had kind of two sides of the same thing playing out simultaneously, the civil criminal side of things in Argentina, and then the Vatican side of things that kind of have all been advancing slowly on their own separate tracks. But I think to think that they are not being influenced by each other would be a really ignorant thing to think. This is not happening in a vacuum. A source close to the case stated that Pope Leo supported the holding of the meeting organized by the network Ending Clergy Abuse. There is an expectation of a statement from the Pope after the conference. However, the Vatican said it can neither confirm nor deny the information. Opus Dei, which operates in more than 70 countries, denies the accusations, of course. One of the whistleblowers, Claudia Carrero, will participate in the conference. She claims that she was taken to an Opus Dei school at age 13 in 1979 under the promise of vocational training, but ended up subjected to domestic work and strict control. According to Carrero, similar accounts have been heard in countries such as Mexico, Italy, Spain, Ireland, Peru, and Chile, which for her indicates a pattern. The women say they hope the meeting will lead to concrete changes within the church and prevent new cases from occurring. Because I think at this point, that is a really big consideration. If this organization is going to stick around, if the Vatican is not going to suppress it as it has suppressed other harmful organizations in the past, then how it proceeds with interacting with people and its proselytism activities is important, considering the things they've been accused of up to this point. All right, moving right along. So this is from the 17th, the day after the ECA summit. A historic event in Buenos Aires, the first World Summit on Opus Dei abuses, was held. So this is following, and I figured we would just read and see what they have to say about that. Again, this has been translated from Spanish to English on my browser. So Buenos Aires became the global epicenter on Tuesday for exposing serious cases of institutional abuse targeting Opus Dei, an ecclesial organization entrenched in the Catholic Church since the late 1920s, which Pope Francis has fought against from Rome. For more than 3 hours, journalists, researchers, lawyers, family members, and victims from a bunch of different countries gathered at the first global summit organized by the ECA network, revealing the alleged criminal activities of this group. The day was divided into 3 sections, like we read. Opus Dei is key to the history and reality of all of these groups with sectarian characteristics, Salinas stated, highlighting the work of Pope Francis continued these days by Pope Leo to eradicate them. It is worth remembering that the organization was founded by Escriva in 1928. Paula Bistagnino participated, Gareth Gore participated, Monica Toribas, not to mention all the various survivors. Let's see. Gore was quoted saying, according to the organization itself, Opus Dei has a single purpose: to help everyone find Christ in their work, family life, and all of their activities. But for me, these are nothing but empty words designed to distract people from the harsh reality, Gore summarized. And I would have to agree with that perspective as well. He clarified, it's exactly the opposite. Opus Dei doesn't exist to help others, but to help itself. For almost 100 years, this group has been able to operate with near total impunity, abusing the legitimacy conferred by the Vatican to attract innocent victims. And that's a very, very good point, and something that I think is so important to keep in mind. The fact that just because Opus Dei is a Catholic organization means that it carries a sort of assumed degree of credibility in a lot of people's eyes, and a lot of Catholic people's eyes, because they're going to know that no organization would be able to exist and be a participating member of the body of Christ and the life of the church if it was not within alignment with the Vatican. Ergo, Opus Dei must have the approval of the Vatican and must therefore be good, because people want to be able to trust the church and trust the decisions that the church makes. Opus Dei has used that to their advantage, I think, and Gareth Gore is in agreement with that. According to the expert, this is an organization that has actively recruited minors pre-selected for manipulation. Gore explains that this is how they manage to extract girls from vulnerable areas and reduce them to a life of servitude, offering them false promises of a good education and a better life. He repeatedly broke the seal of confession to take advantage of his own members. For Opus Dei, faith is a tool that can be used to obtain money, influence, and obedience for the benefit of the organization, Gore warned. Whoops, my article just flipped back to Spanish. In turn, Toribas recalled that Opus Dei now must provide an annual accounting of the funds it handles in relation to priests. Speaking from Spain, she maintained that there is a systemic pattern of spiritual abuse and psychological coercion of each and every person who ends up becoming a member of that organization. There are many numeraries, supernumeraries, associates, and cooperators who do not feel abused, which is very true, and I'm glad that she's acknowledging that. But, and this is a big but, there are many more who are leaving because they consider themselves victims of spiritual abuse in the name of God, because life is subjected to a dynamic of rules that makes your own judgment disappear. Two things can be true at the same time. Peruvian, the order of the words got out of whack here. Peruvian professor of philosophy Edgar Minube, who spent more than 15 years as an associate member of Opus Dei, described the organization as a great spiritual fraud. It should be noted that a significant portion of the clergy in Peru was comprised of priests from this group. Peru is not a very big country, so they managed to kind of take over a small nation, and more or less from a clerical perspective, according to Edgar Minube. And I would think that he would know, having spent 15 years as an associate member of the organization. Minube stated that all members were required to hand over their entire salary and sign a will listing all of their assets. Yes, this is something that numerous former members have reported being required to do. Argentine Federico Johansson, a former numerary member of Opus Dei, explained that the incorporation process involves a series of deceptions perpetrated by the organization. Bistagnino emphasized that, Quote, "It's clear how schematic, structured, hierarchical, and pyramidal it is." Paraphrasing a numerary member who spent more than 30 years in Opus Dei, the Argentine journalist asserted that it is a mixture of a sect, a multinational cooperation, and a political party. She added that it's present in 68 countries and operates like a franchise. The second session addressed the law and church abuse, a challenge to justice. During this segment, lawyer Lucas Licor, member of the ECA, Sergio Salinas Giordano, director of ECA, and Sebastian Sal, who's representing the 43 women, specialists in criminal law, human rights, and human trafficking, presented their findings. They analyzed the legal obstacles and structural shortcomings faced by victims when reporting abuse within religious institutions. Quote, 4 or 5 years ago, I received an email from the 43 women, and to think what has happened since then is incredible. Legally, what we have here is the recruitment of people, said Sal, who explained that because of its organization, Opus Dei, which is vertical and pyramidal, and nothing is left to chance, orders were given from the prelate down. Thus, keeps popping back over to Spanish. Thus setting up a structure to recruit minors, numeraries who went to different parts of the country looking for vulnerable Catholic families with many children, which is just really, really dark and predatory when you really stop to think about it in context, especially given the fact that the Catholic Church has kind of had a habit of sort of implicitly encouraging Catholics to have children and to have many, many children. In some cases, you could argue more children than the parents can adequately support and provide for. And so that creates a bit of a situation that is ripe for exploitation. And who but Opus Dei is waiting to take advantage of that vulnerability? It's really, really dark and twisted, really messed up when you stop to think about it and step back and look at the forest for the trees. How you could not feel sick to your stomach over this is beyond me. According to what could be pieced together, they were then submitted as students, and after spiritual, professional, and vocational training, were made numerary assistants to perform domestic tasks in Opus Dei centers both in Argentina and abroad. In most cases, their freedoms were restricted, and they were paid a sum of money that was withheld and managed by the same people who were supposed to pay them. The lawyer explained that it all began with a journalistic investigation, which a civil association then used to file a criminal complaint with Protex. Sal, for his part, joined the legal action. Prosecutors Eduardo Tayano, Alejandra Mangiano, and Marcello Colombo, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing all of those names perfectly, conducted a thorough investigation involving the then #1 representative of Opus Dei in the country. Now, the case is under the jurisdiction of Judge Danielle Rafecas, who has moved forward with the possibility of adding new victims to the file, victims who are currently being abused by the network. So that would be a really huge development if that were decided, because one of the defenses of Opus Dei since these victims, these 43 women, stepped forward has been that, well, this all happened in the past and we're super sorry about it, but it's in the past now and everything is fine. But if what is being written here is to be believed, they are considering, the judge who's been assigned this case is considering adding victims who are currently being abused. And that means, contrary to what Opus Dei has said, nothing has changed, which is what everybody has been saying since day one. Licor recounted the difficulties he and his team faced investigating the abuses committed at the Antonio Provolo Institute for the Deaf in the province of Mendoza, where 2 priests were sentenced to 43 and 45 years of prison. Interestingly, the Vatican has changed its approach to these types of cases where suspects were typically protected by the church itself through transfers and other means. In the third segment, the focus shifted to family members and victims. Bistagnino asserted that Opus Dei boasts of having no abuse cases within its ranks. However, the journalist explained that there have been serious incidents and introduced Juan Cuatrecasas, the father of a young man who was abused at the Gatzalueta school in Spain. He emphasized the organization's network of contacts within the justice system and the various cover-up strategies they employ. Another testimony of the day came from Francisco, a man who revealed that he was abused in the early 1990s at a camp at a club. He recounted that once he decided to report Opus Dei, they refused to take his case. However, after he went public through Bestagnino, Opus Dei claimed to have had 8 abusers in Argentina. The panel was completed by Monica Zambrano from Santa Fe, Claudia Carrero from Ramallo, and Visitacion Villamayor from Paraguay. I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering that name. All 3 studied at the Bella Vista Maid School, formerly known as the Comprehensive Training Institute for Domestic Studies. Quote, "My mother taught us a lot of love for the Virgin Mary and God, and I think that was the starting point for us getting involved. I have a sister who's there, but I don't talk to her about this because she doesn't want to know anything about it," explained Zambrano, who arrived at the school at age 15. The woman recounted that she was offered the opportunity to return to her studies and find employment. The workday was long and intense. "We had to rush around," she said. As soon as they finished breakfast, each girl had to check a bulletin board to see what the tasks she would have to do that day. From there, they would begin their chores at the housekeeper's school, which was also housed in the main Opus Dei retreat house in Buenos Aires since the late 1960s. The work consisted of cleaning, preparing food, and washing and ironing clothes. After some homework around mid-morning, a priest gave them lessons. Then they continued working, had lunch, and went back to work. They returned to the school at around 6 p.m. and continued working until dinner. After dinner, they continued their tasks in what they called the tertulia, a social gathering. Finally, at 10 p.m., they had to go to their rooms where they were not allowed to speak to each other. Claudia arrived at the school at age 14 in 1980. She was a student, initially enrolled as an assistant teacher, and later taught classes. She said that they learned subjects such as labor sciences, workshop practices, and cooking classes, in addition to courses in mathematics, language, and history. "Sometimes we would arrive and fall asleep from exhaustion. They would send us to the bathroom to wash behind our ears to stay awake," she stated. Finally, Villamayor recounted that she was recruited from her village about 5 hours from Asuncion. She explained that her family was very poor and she saw an opportunity to study. However, as soon as she arrived at the Paraguayan capital, she was separated from her cousin and forced to work. She waited for months to go to school in Buenos Aires. And again, it's popping back to Spanish. Finally, as a minor, she was transferred to Argentina. According to her account, she first stayed for a while in Recoleta and from there went to Bella Vista, where her workday began at 6 a.m. and ended at 10 p.m. Villamayor repeatedly asked to return to her country, but her request was denied. Each time she insisted, she said she was transferred from city to city and even from province to province. And I'm wondering, was proper paperwork filed and kept for those various transfers? Was there proper paperwork for her crossing national borders to leave her country to go and work for Opus Dei? I'm going to take a gander and a wild guess and say probably not. Later, she returned to Bella Vista, where she considered escaping, but she was undocumented and afraid, so she had no paperwork. I was right. No paperwork. So she's trapped. You know what it's called when someone who has more power and more money than you says, "Hey, come on over here and we'll give you a job and we'll pay you." And then you come over believing them and then they take everything away from you and deny your request to leave? Do you know what that's called? I do. It's called labor trafficking. And it's a really big freaking deal. It's a crime worthy of prison time. And there's a lot of years lost for all these dozens and dozens, hundreds, thousands of people that have come into contact with this organization. Somebody is accountable for those lost years. I would not want to be the number 2 in charge of Opus Dei right now. I wouldn't want to be the number 1 in charge of Opus Dei right now, if I'm being totally honest, because it's not looking real good. All right, moving right along. We got this one and then one final, and then we'll be wrapping up. Thank you so much for being here with me through this. Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're interested in checking out any of my other work, connecting with me on socials, all of that stuff is linked down in the description of this episode. And I hope that you will. So this was published on, is there a date? Down at the bottom? No. Oh, right up here in the top, tiny. December 20th. So this is another following the summit. This was also translated from Spanish to English, Sexual Abuse and Trafficking for the Purpose of Servitude, Opus Dei Crimes Revealed at Unprecedented Summit. So this is, again, just about the events during and following the summit. Kind of just to scan through here and see if there's anything in this article that wasn't in the previous one, although that was a great article, I thought, very detailed. Let's see. So yes, experts attended. It was held in Buenos Aires. People from all over the world, all over Spain, Latin America, and the UK showed up for this thing. There were lawyers and experts and survivors, and they talked about the difficulties of accessing justice and various forms of clerical abuse. I am sure that the statute of limitations came up in that as well, which is always a problem because, the statute of limitations say that you can't go bringing up a crime that occurred so many decades ago. But that's a roadblock for a lot of survivors accessing justice or anything, really, because it can take decades for a person to come to grips with the fact that what they went through was abuse. So there's a lot of conversation right now actually happening in my country and other countries around the world about the statute of limitations. It's been relaxed in certain cases in some states, and I think we're going to see a lot more change over time just because of the fact that, like I said, it can take so long for a person to come to terms with something that happened to them, and even longer yet to decide that actually they need to do something about it. And if something like a statute of limitations has run out by the time that they come to that decision, then that can really leave people in a horrible, horrible spot. So anyway, the announcement of the unprecedented meeting anticipated the participation of former members of Opus Dei and family members. They mentioned that the Pope received the representatives of the ESA, which was a first for them, which is sad. Talk about how the initial complaint by the 43 women back before it reached the crisis point that it is at now, when it was originally submitted to the Vatican, precipitated some changes being made to Opus Dei's privileges and how it stands with the rest of the church. The Argentine newspaper Tiempo Argentino considered the summit an historic event. And then women were reported being recruited as teenagers from poor families, trained as domestic servants, and supposedly to provide them with employment opportunities, but those never came, and they were instead forced to work these grueling hours, cooking and cleaning and washing and ironing, and also receiving this religious instruction, which I'm sure in no way, shape, or form helped them with the pressures that they were under. And of course, they never received any payment. During their confinement, they were not allowed to speak to each other, and rest periods were minimal, as they had to work from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, including weekends. From the beginning, family visits were forbidden. They were also not allowed to leave or return home, even if they requested it. They only managed to leave after escaping and beginning to denounce what was happening at the religious institution. The stories of the people who have had to get away from this organization sound like they should belong in Scientology or something like that, frankly. They are so harrowing and so sad and so heartbreaking. And if you are not familiar with the experiences that people are having, these women are having in this organization, I just at the end of this past year got to interview Anne-Marie Allen, who is an Irish former assistant numerary of Opus Dei. She wrote a book called Serve: My Lost Years at the Heart of Ireland's Opus Dei. Got it sitting behind me on my bookshelf, and she so graciously shared several hours of her time with me to tell me about her experience in Opus Dei and the things that she saw and the things that she went through and the toll that the experience took on her physically and mentally. And it's a really, really intense thing. And I think people maybe have become a little bit desensitized to the term human trafficking because we hear it so much anymore, that the full weight of what it actually means and what it looks like for the day-to-day lives of the people who are being trafficked can sometimes kind of be forgotten. And Anne-Marie provided some just fantastic clarity and exposition on what that is actually like to be that person who is being trafficked. And I think it's pretty easy to take her experience and extrapolate that out and apply it to the experiences of many, many, many women in Opus Dei, because the one thing you got to hand to this organization out of everything is that they are really good at being consistent, and at least in my opinion, being consistently terrible. And so the things that a person experiences in one part of the world are very likely going to be reflected in the experiences of other people in other parts of the world, just because there is this sort of cohesion across the board within the organization, which is really, I think, really, really interesting. So anyway, let's see. Moving on from that, this is the last article. And then I'll show you the ECA Global's YouTube channel as well. So this was published on January 2nd, 2026, and is the final article that I'll read discussing the summit. Opus Dei victims speak at a summit in Buenos Aires. Quote, "I realized I was a prisoner." This was written by Laura Guarinoni. Apologies if I did not pronounce your last name correctly. Visitacion Villamayor, a former auxiliary numerary of Opus Dei, is one of the 43 women in Argentina who have reported being victims of trafficking and servitude. During an international meeting in Buenos Aires to discuss abuses in the church, she acknowledged, "I realized I was a prisoner." Villamayor has thus made one of their first public statements since making the complaint, and it was at the first international summit of ECA Global Ending Clergy Abuse, where investigative journalists, lawyers, victims, and former members of the organization participated. Quote, "A friend came to visit me and I realized that she was free. She had the key to where she worked, where she lived. She received a salary. She could go dancing, watch TV, listen to music. I realized that I was a prisoner." That's the full quote. Here's another one. "I was moved between Paraguay and Argentina for years without documents and as a minor while I insisted that I wanted to leave. It took 4 years for them to let me go." The forum was attended by Peruvian journalist Pedro Salinas, who denounced the abuses of the Sodalitium and is author of the book The Truth Made Us Free, History of the Abuses and the Fall of the Sodalitium. And he said, "This is an important forum, the first of its kind, to focus on an organization as controversial as Opus Dei, which in Argentina has had a very strong epicenter with the case of the 43 former auxiliary numeraries who are, in practice, a kind of modern-day slaves." And he told the EFE that what the 43 did is so important. Many of them had no resources, no assets, no jobs, and yet they persevered. They didn't receive any payment. They did it out of conviction, and that makes them a tremendous example. Of course, Opus Dei has continued to deny the accusations of labor exploitation and has accused the media of having distorted the reality of the case. In a statement published that day on its website, well, that's kind of aging like milk. Bistagnino is quoted here saying, "This is a landmark case not only from a legal standpoint, but also because of what it represents for Latin America and other countries. We heard from women throughout the region, from Spain, from France, who had experienced similar situations." Oh, that was attributed to lawyer Sal. The way that these quotes are set up is a little bit misleading because it'll start at the top talking about one person. You'll think the quote is from them and it's from someone else. But anyway, a lot of people showed up for this thing, which is amazing. They all had something to say, either because of their experience or because of their expertise, which is also amazing. And, you know, I would really, really, honestly love to participate in the next one. If there is another ECA summit in 2026, I would really, really love to participate or at least support it in some way, shape, or form. I didn't find out about this one until literally like the week of that it was about to happen. Just didn't work out, didn't find out about it in time, but I'm so happy that it happened and that people are coming together to speak about this kind of thing so publicly, because that is really the only way that I think the needle is going to be moved on this issue one way or the other. So before we close this out, I wanted to go ahead and show you the ECA Global's YouTube page. They have just 4 videos, it looks like, up right now, but they're from the summit. And I haven't had a chance, I just started that one right there, but I haven't had a chance to go through them all yet. I'm hoping that the presenters that are not speaking English have subtitles, or I'm hoping the entire thing has subtitles. We'll see. I haven't started to watch it yet, but if you want to subscribe to their YouTube channel and support what they're doing, you can find them ECA Global. I've also linked their page down in the description of this video, so you can go and access it that way. And if you can support, please do. Subscribing is free, and it does help a lot. But all right, I think that brings us to the end. I wanted to go over and talk about this summit, and I wanted to do it in a standalone video instead of doing it as part of a newsroom analysis, which is what I would have done in the past. Just because, again, like I said, this is such a big deal. The fact that people are gathering together to have these conversations is huge, and I hope that this marks the beginning of a trend going forward for 2026 and the years to come. These kinds of conversations need to be happening in public spaces, or at least in ways that are accessible to the public to at least listen in to what is being said. I think one of the big mistakes that the Catholic Church has made in the past when it has come to trying to contend with the issue of clerical abuse is that they have preferred to do things in this kind of backwards, in-house, behind closed doors way that has honestly not engendered itself well towards making the Vatican look like they are really trying, that they really care, that this is about actually helping people. And that has created a lot of strife and turmoil for victims and survivors, and has, I think, in the long run, done the Catholic Church's reputation a lot of harm. But I guess they didn't need a whole lot of help in that regard. So anyway, thank you so much for tuning into this. I hope that you got something out of it. You found it interesting. You'll have to let me know if you do end up going and listening to any of the videos that ECA Global posted on their YouTube channel, what your thoughts on those are. I'm also going to be taking a look at those, time and workload and everything permitting. And I am sure there are some real nuggets in there, because just some of the quotes that we read in these articles I thought were just excellent. And again, anything that we can do to put this reality, which, abuse is happening regardless of whether or not we want to acknowledge it, the more that we can do to put that at the forefront can only be a good thing in the long run, especially in terms of like instigating change and reform and all of that good stuff. So that is where I'm going to leave this video for now. I will have another video coming out in the not too distant future about a situation with an Opus Dei school over in Spain and some child abuse. Super fun. So anyway, keep your eyes peeled for that. Subscribe so you don't miss it if you haven't already. And I will have a new video for you all very, very soon. And in the meantime, do not forget, nolite te bastardes carborandorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.